Hi. Welcome to The History House. I'm Amar Saeed and you are watching History of the World Part 4 and your favorite YouTube channel, The History House. Please watch the complete video. Do not forget to subscribe this channel and like video in order to get very important and interesting videos on daily basis. In first part we have discussed about the influence of climate on the history of the world. In second part we have discussed about departures and the continuity, while in third part we have discussed about European Middle Ages, America and Africa. In this video we will discuss about globalization, from colonialization to imperialism. Colonization. Colonization happened after Christopher Columbus came to the Americas. European countries such as England, France, and Spain built colonies in the Americas. These settlers fought the Native Americans to take over their land. The colonization of the Americas was the beginning of modern times. An important part about contact with the Americas was the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange brought new foods, ideas, and diseases to the Old World and New World, changing the way people lived. Historians believe that almost everyone as far as Asia was affected in some way by the Columbian Exchange. Reformation and Counter-Reformation. Protestant Reformation started with Martin Luther and the posting of the 95 Theses on the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. At first he protested against corruption such as simony or the sale of indulgences. But then it became clear that he had different ideas about the church doctrine. He thought that Christians should only read the Bible to find out what God wants from them. That meant that they did not need priests. C. 5 solas. The three most important traditions that came directly from the Protestant Reformation were the Lutheran, Reformed, Calvinist, Presbyterian, etc., and Anglican traditions. The Counter-Reformation, or Catholic Reformation, was the Catholic Church fighting the Protestant Reformation. New religious orders, such as the Jesuits, were founded and missionaries sent around the world. Decisions were taken at the Council of Trent, 1545–1563. Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain. It brought many advances in the way goods were produced. These advances allowed people to produce much more than they needed for living. The early British Empire split as its colonies in America revolted to establish a representative government. From nationalism to imperialism, the French Revolution led to massive political change in continental Europe, as people following the ideas of Enlightenment asked for human rights with the slogan Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, Liberty, Equality, Fraternity. That led to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, but also to terror and the execution of King Louis XVI. The French leader, Napoleon Bonaparte, conquered and changed Europe through war up to 1815. As more and more small property holders were granted the vote, in France and the UK, socialist and trade union activity developed and revolution gripped Europe in 1848. The last vestiges of serfdom were abolished in Austria-Hungary in 1848. Russian serfdom was abolished in 1861. The Balkan nations began to regain their independence from the Ottoman Empire. After the Franco-Prussian War, Italy and Germany became unified in 1870 and 1871. Conflicts spread across the globe, in a chase for empires. The search for a place in the sun ended with the outbreak of World War I. In the desperation of war, the Russian Revolution promised the people peace, bread and land. The defeat of Germany came at the price of economic destruction, which was written down in the Treaty of Versailles. Asia. China, continuity. From 1644 to 1912 the Qing or Manchu dynasty ruled China. The dynasty was founded by the Manchu clan in northeast China, Manchuria. It expanded into China proper and its surrounding territories, establishing the empire of the Great Qing. Its military power weakened during the 1800s, and faced with international pressure, massive rebellions and defeats in wars, the Qing dynasty declined after the mid-19th century. It was overthrown in 1912. Japan. During the Edo period, Japan had many small rulers. There were about 200 of them, called the daimyo. Out of them, the Tokugawa clan was most powerful. They ruled from a place called Edo. This place was around the present day's Tokyo. For 15 generations they were the most powerful clan in Japan. Beginning from the early 17th century, the rulers, known as shogunate, started a policy of seclusion, stopping some people coming in, known as sakoku in Japanese language. They suspected that traders, merchants and missionaries wanted to bring Japan under the control of European powers. Except the Dutch and the Chinese, all foreigners, traders and merchants from other countries, missionaries were no longer allowed into Japan. Still, even during the period of seclusion, Japanese continued to gain information and knowledge about other parts of the world. This policy of seclusion lasted for about 200 years. It ended 1868 with Meiji Restoration, when the emperor took over again and started a lot of reforms. India, Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire existed from 1526 to 1857. When it was biggest, it ruled most of the Indian subcontinent, then known as Hindustan, and parts of what is now Afghanistan. It was founded by Babur in 1526 and ruled until 1530. Its most important ruler was Akbar (1556 to 1605). After the death of Aurangzeb (1658 to 1707), the Mughal Empire became weak. It continued until 1857. By that time, India came under the British Raj. America. Settlement by the Spanish started the European colonization of the Americas. It meant genocide of the native Indians. The Spanish gained control of most of the Caribbean and conquered the Aztecs. So they founded the Spanish Empire in the New World. The first successful English settlements were in North America at Jamestown, Virginia, 1607, along with its satellite, Bermuda in 1609, and Plymouth, Massachusetts, 1620. The first French settlements were Port Royal, 1604, and Quebec City, 1608. The fur trade soon became the primary business on the continent and as a result transformed the Native Americans' lifestyle. Plantation slavery of the West Indies led to the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. Rivalry between the European powers created a series of wars on the North American landmass. The American Revolution led to the creation of the United States of America. Spain's hold on its colonies weakened till it had to give them independence. The United States expanded quickly to the west. At the same time, British built more in Canada. Africa. During the 15th century, the Portuguese began exploring Africa. At the Guinea coast, they built their first fort in 1482. They started slave trade after the first European contact with America in 1492 to supply settlers from there with workers. Soon English, Spanish, Dutch, French and Danish merchants also built forts. But their influence on the inland was minor, except from decimation of population by slave trade, till during the 19th century larger colonies were founded. 20th century onward. The 20th century was a very important time in history. New technology and different ideas led to many worldwide changes in the time of just 100 years. World Wars. The First World War. World War I was a war fought from 1914 to 1918. During the time of the war, it was called the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. Chemical poisons, tanks, aeroplanes, and bombs were used for the first time. There were four main causes of the war: imperialism, nationalism, alliances, militarism. These were causes that made it likely that a war would start in Europe. The spark that started the war was the assassination of the heir to the throne in Austria-Hungary, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, by a group of young Serbians. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia and each country's allies then joined the war. This created a bigger conflict which turned into World War I. Europe divided into two groups of allies, the Central Powers and the Allied Powers, the Allies. The Central Powers were made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria. The Allies were made up of Britain, France, Russia, Italy and the United States. World War I was fought on two fronts, the Eastern Front and the Western Front. Trench warfare was commonly used on the Eastern Front. Because of a British blockade, Germany began using U-boats, or submarines, to sink British ships. After the sinking of two ships with Americans on board, and the public release of the Zimmermann Note, the U.S. declared war on Germany, joining the Allies. On November 11, 1918, Germany signed the armistice, meaning the laying down of arms, to end the war. After the war ended, the Treaty of Versailles was written and Germany was made to sign it. They had to pay $33 million in reparations payment for damage. The influenza pandemic of 1918 spread around the world, killing millions. After the First War, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire and Austrian Empire ended and France and Britain got weaker. The 1920s and 1930s had military-related fascist dictators take control of Italy, Germany, Japan and Spain. When Hitler in 1933 had gained power in Germany, he prepared World War II. The Second World War. Of all the wars ever fought, World War II involved the most countries and killed the most people. More than 60 million people died, making it the worst disaster of all time. It lasted 6 years in Europe, from 1939 to 1945. It was fought between the Axis powers Germany, Italy and Japan, and the Allied powers. But Hitler was able to pursue his plan to annihilate Jews nearly all over Europe. Today, this plan is called the Holocaust. In the Pacific, it ended with the battles of Midway and Guadalcanal. Germany surrendered on May 8. The atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki led Japan to surrender on August 15, 1945. After World War II, the United Nations was founded in the hope that it could solve arguments among nations and keep wars from happening. Communism spread to Central and Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, Albania, North Vietnam and North Korea. In 1949, China became communist. During the 1950s and 1960s, many Third World countries became communist. This led to the Cold War, a 40-year argument between the United States, the Soviet Union, and their allies, mainly countries that were members of NATO or the Warsaw Pact. The Soviet Union wanted to spread communism, and the United States wanted to spread democracy. People across the world feared a nuclear war because of the tension. Communism became less popular when it became clear that it could not promote economic growth as well as Western states and that it was not suited for a reform that allowed freedom of speech for everybody. Therefore, the Soviet Union forced Hungary to give up its reform in 1956, it favored the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961 and it stopped reform in Czechoslovakia in 1968. When in 1988–89 Gorbachev made clear that he would not force the countries of the East Bloc to stick to communism, the Berlin Wall was torn down in 1989 and the Soviet Union collapsed 1991. 76 Then the United States was the only superpower left. After Mao Zedong's death, China's Communist Party proved that economic reform was possible without political freedom and paved the way for enormous economic growth. As the 20th century ended, the European Union began to rise and included former satellite states and even parts of the Soviet Union. States in Asia, Africa and South America tried to copy the European Union. The 20th century was a time of great progress in terms of technology. People began to live longer because of better medicine and medical technology. New communications and transportation technologies connected the world. But these advances also helped cause problems with the environment. The last half of the century had smaller wars. Improved information technology and globalization increased trade and cultural exchange. Space exploration expanded through the solar system. The structure of DNA was discovered. The same period also raised questions about the end of human history because of global dangers, nuclear weapons, greenhouse effect and other problems in the environment. 21st century. As the 20th century ended, globalization continued. The September 11th attacks in 2001 in the US led to new wars. Urbanization also continued in countries like India and China. Some scientists referred to this as a planetary phase of civilization. This period has been growing of mobile phones and the internet, which changed social and natural resources in the world. A new Great Recession affected the world, and the COVID-19 pandemic spread in 2020, causing further economic and political disruption. Thanks a lot for watching The History House YouTube channel. Please like this video and subscribe the channel in order to get very important and interesting videos on daily basis.